On the under $3 menu at McDonald's, the sausage burrito is $2. So dip, drizzle, or douse to your heart's desire. Because no matter how you sauce your sausage burrito, it's still just $2 with McValue.
Limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher for delivery.
He's a retired homicide detective from the Toronto Police Department in Canada. He investigated multiple murders, including a serial killer that preyed on gay men. He's here to talk about those and more on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. If you're on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app, be sure to look for me and follow me. My name's John, the letter J, Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. You can also search for at LET Radio Show. That's John J. Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, at LET Radio Show on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app. Joining us from Canada, we have Hank Idsinga. He's retired from the Toronto Police Department. He is a homicide detective, which we'll talk about in a few moments. And by the way, I've been getting a lot of people from Canada. Recently had Jen Hyland from the Surrey Police Service, RCMP. She was, I guess, on the show. A few others. I think you make number 5. He's author of the book, The High Road, Confessions of a Homicide Cop. Hank, thanks for your service. Thanks for being guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, talking all about it.
John, amazing to be here chatting with you, and really, really flattered to be here. And yeah, I know Jennifer Hyland as well, and she's also written a book, but mine came out in late April, like you said, The High Road, Confessions of the Homicide Cop, and it's going to be amazing to talk to you about it here on the radio show.
Well, one of the cases, we're talking about your career in general first, but one of the cases I saw a documentary, I believe it's on Netflix, I don't remember which one it was, about the serial killer that preyed on gay men. And you were the major case manager in that case. That's terminology we didn't use in Baltimore.
Yeah, it really is. The province of Ontario up here in Canada, where Toronto is, has a mandated piece of legislation that any major cases, such as homicides, have to be investigated in a certain way, and it's called major case management. And one of the roles in the command pyramid for major case management is that of major case manager. So much like in the United States, as you would see, you'd have your major case manager, you'd have your primary investigator or investigators, you'd have your file manager or file managers, you'd have your affiants for search warrants and whatnot, all fall into that kind of pyramid structure of an investigation, and the major case manager is the one who sits at the top and really has the responsibility of the entire investigation. So the serial killer that you're speaking of, a fellow named Bruce McArthur, a really interesting case, and we can get into it, but it really went on for years as a missing persons investigation, which really didn't fall under homicide's mandate for some time, but eventually evolved into that.
Before we get into the details of that case, because it really is a fascinating case, and it really shows, I think, how a lot of cases are put together, because it's not like what Hollywood. I watch these shows on television, and I'm like, number one, crimes aren't solved in an hour, usually. Number two, Exactly. It could take years. Number three, they don't show all the behind-scenes work. And by the way, cases on television are solved by forensics, and quite often they're not. They're solved by gumshoe police work.
It is good old-fashioned gumshoe police work, knocking on doors, talking to people hours and hours and days on end with no sleep. And really, that's what solves homicide cases. It definitely isn't done in 40 minutes or 45 minutes like you see in these TV shows. And it's good to be able to put it down in the book and on paper. And, a lot of feedback I've gotten from it has been, wow, I didn't realize how much actually goes on behind the scenes. So the book definitely illustrates that.
By the way, in our department, in the Baltimore Police Department, most of the homicide detectives, they cut their teeth as patrolmen. And I laugh. I'll be honest with you. They're like, I'm going to go to college. And there's nothing wrong with college and police work. I'm not one of these anti-college people. But they say, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to learn this, and then I'm going to come to the academy, and then I'm going to go to homicide. That's not how it works. You got to work earn your dues, and you work night shift, you work patrol. How long did you patrol before you went into homicide?
Well, it took me 16 years to get into homicide, about 10 years of uniform patrol, and then I got my first promotion, and I did another 5 years in another division, made my way into the divisional detective office there, and then in 2005 I got to homicide, and that's what I wanted to do from day one, so I was very fortunate there. But, it's funny, I teach at a local community college, and I always ask my students on day one what it is they want to do, and an awful lot of them put up their hands and they say, I want to be a homicide detective, and it's a lengthy explanation as to how you can get there, but it certainly doesn't happen the instant you join the police service and you can go right to homicide. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of honing your skills, as you said, and a little bit of luck as well, and you have to be good at it to get to that level.
Plus the hours of being a homicide detective. I don't know about your agency. We had homicide detectives. They worked until the case they couldn't get any further. I'd say they put in 24, 36, 48 hours more sometimes on cases.
Yeah, same thing up here. The longest run I had, and I always say the call that I dreaded was on a Friday evening, because you'd work all week. I used to get up at 4:15 every morning to go into work, and you'd work all week, and you finally get home Friday evening, sit down, have dinner with the family, and suddenly the phone rings, and you're going to be up for another 24, 36 hours minimum. And I had one of those cases, and it happened a couple of times where I got that Friday evening call, and I didn't get home again till Sunday night. And that is just straight through 3 days straight of staying up, and your brain stops functioning, and your body stops functioning, and it's tough to get through, but you can't lose that momentum that you have in an investigation, and you just have to keep going. So lots of coffee and lots of long hours, but you've got to get the job done.
There's a few television shows and that I think reflect that. One be the first 48, and there's people they put an ungodly amount of time into the preliminary stages of investigation. And one of the things that goes out the window for me very quickly is my people skills.
Yeah, your ability to carry on a conversation, your ability to keep things straight in your head. I write in the book about the number of times where I'd be sitting there with my partner and we'd be conducting an interview 36, 48 hours into an investigation, and you can literally see the line of my pen making a squiggly line going downwards and to the right-hand side of the piece of paper, because I'm falling asleep as I'm trying to keep up and take notes. So, and those are the investigations, like you said, you go for 48, 72 hours straight, but sometimes you have a lengthy investigation that would go on for weeks and weeks, where you're going home, sleeping for an hour and a half, 2 hours, getting up, going back and doing it again. And by the time you're done with runs like that, you're just absolutely wiped. You need a week or two off just to sleep and recover, and usually it's, okay, I'm good to go, and off you go again to the next one. So definitely some ungodly hours, and the first 48 is fantastic, although it does compress it into a 1 hour time frame. So it's hard to appreciate everything else that is going on as well in the background there, but definitely a good reflection of what your normal run on a homicide case is. Guarantee you're going to be going hard for 48 hours at the very least.
And it is a non-stop job. By the way, there's lots of terms that a lot of people use, but in Baltimore, it's their job started when your day ended. And they were the voice for the homicide victims, and they took their job very seriously, and they had a great clearance record. We're talking with Hank Idsinga. He is retired Toronto Police Service. He's wrote the book, The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop. And when we return, we're talking about being a major case manager on an investigation of a serial killer that preyed on gay men. Again, his book is called The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop. You can find us on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. I promise you, we'll be right back. You can find us on Facebook. Just search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and be sure to click like. Turn our conversation with Hank Idsinga. He is retired Toronto Police Service homicide detective. He wrote a book called The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop. You can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or just 2 locations. That's called Homicide Cop. The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop is the name of the book. One of the things that we talked about earlier was you being the major case manager on a serial killer that preyed on gay men. And I did see a documentary about that involving Toronto. It was a long time ago. But let's start and down memory lane, how you got in the beginning of it, to the middle, to the end. How did this thing get started?
I know the documentary that you're speaking of, and I believe it was a 2-part bid on Netflix. And, they did a good job, but they covered essentially the first half of the investigation. So we had a fellow up here in Toronto. His name was Bruce MacArthur, and he killed his first victim, a fellow named Skanda Navaratnam, back in the fall of 2010. So Skanda was reported as missing by one of his friends, and at the time, nobody knew what had happened to him, and nobody knew where he ended up until many years later. But he was reported missing, and up here, our missing persons occurrences go to the local division. They don't go to the homicide squad, obviously. And MacArthur ended up killing 2 other men. So between 2010 and 2012, he killed 3 men in total from the gay village here in Toronto. And in late 2012, the divisional investigators in 51 Division got a call from police officers in Switzerland. And police officers in Switzerland said, we've got this informant here in Switzerland who's part of a online cannibalism fetish community. And the informant says he's chatting with a fellow up in Canada who claims to have killed and eaten a brown-skinned male from Toronto's gay village. So the investigators at 51 Division made that link, and they ended up calling the homicide squad and said, we've got this online confession from somebody claiming to have killed a brown-skinned male from Toronto's gay village. And sure enough, we've got a missing man from Toronto's gay village who's got brown skin. So that's when I first got involved. That was December of 2012, and we investigated that clue for about 6 months before we were able to conclude that the fellow who was making that claim was full of it. He hadn't killed anybody. He was simply playing out his cannibalism fetish and making that claim.
This is the guy you told the Swiss police that he was full of it?
The guy who told the Swiss police about the fellow in Canada who was supposedly killing and eating somebody from the gay village, he was right. This guy was online. He was claiming to have done that, but the guy who was claiming to have done that was full of it.
Okay,
so
gotcha.
He was just trying to up his reputation in the cannibalism fetish community.
That's a pretty weird community you want to get your street rep in. I'm telling you right now, it's not high on my list.
No, it's not. But you know what? And of course, it sounds unbelievable. And we reacted the same way until the Swiss police said to us, well, the last time this guy gave us similar information, it was for a cannibal in Slovakia. And we passed the information on to the Slovakian police, and they raided this guy's house. They ended up killing him in a shootout. They found the remains of 2 partially consumed corpses on his property, and they've linked him to 24 other missing persons. So that kind of increased the integrity of the information that we were getting. So we definitely had to follow it up and be serious about it. But once we determined that this fellow here in Canada was full of it, we said, okay, it's no longer a homicide investigation, but it goes back to being a missing persons investigation.
And there's not a whole lot you can do with those. And by the way, I got to ask this question. And people would assume that we're talking about gay men as if that's a separate entity. This sort of thing happens with transients, sex workers, prostitutes. It doesn't matter. And they go missing, and quite honestly, a lot of these cases are not solved.
A lot of them aren't, and the vast majority of people reported missing do turn up within 24, 48 hours. And obviously, with this investigation back in 2012, 2013, we're digging into all sorts of different missing persons occurrences. And some people turned up a couple of years later that we thought for sure were victims of foul play. But some people just want to drop off the map and disappear and start their lives over again. So that happens as well. So missing persons investigations, they're constantly evolving. They're constantly high risk and a lot of liability there for the police and the investigators. But in Toronto, for instance, we get over 5,000 missing persons occurrences filed every single year. So it's definitely a real strain on police resources, but they have to be investigated properly because they are so high risk. So.
And I'll be honest, I really don't know where to start. I know they have a lot more technical stuff nowadays than when I had policing, and probably even so than you were policing. Yeah,
absolutely. The way missing persons occurrences have evolved, and especially with utilizing technology, such as cellular telephones and video surveillance and banking and financial records, the investigative process is constantly evolving and definitely different. I mean, I started in 1989, and even back then, if somebody called to report a loved one missing, we had that 24-hour rule, right? And we got bitten on the butt with that one, with a young missing person here in Toronto, where the police wouldn't take the report for 24 hours, and he turned up in Lake Ontario deceased.
Right.
And so they changed it back then, and then it constantly evolved, right? It used to be the case where if somebody from another city wanted to call and report somebody missing, the Toronto police wouldn't even take the report. They'd refer them to the local police service. Things like that have changed and evolved to the point where now we have an actual missing persons unit within the Toronto Police that falls under the umbrella of the Homicide Squad, and they're very, very effective at controlling the quality of the investigations. They're still being mostly handled at the divisional level.
One of the things that we would say, and I'm paraphrasing here, but when it came to missing persons calls, unless there was evidence that there was some sort of foul play, we didn't get involved until a certain period of time expired. But we always look for that evidence. Was that the case with you guys involving a serial killer?
That was the case, and that still is the case. And like I said, this went back to the division and carried on as a missing persons investigation. And it wasn't until 2017 where, in the meantime, MacArthur actually killed several more men. And then it was in June of 2017 where he killed a fellow named Andrew Kinsman. And the big difference with Andrew Kinsman at the end of June of 2017 was Andrew had a normal routine. He had a regular job. He was the superintendent of a rooming house. He was in constant communication with some of his friends and his tenants. And when he went missing, it was really this is out of character. Something's going on here. And that's when we got involved again. And we ended up identifying MacArthur because he had been interviewed in 2013 in relation to the first three missing
Hang on that note, because we're going to return to that conversation in a few moments. We're talking with Hank Idsinga, a retired Toronto police homicide detective. He's the author of the book, The High Road, Confessions of a Homicide Cop. Look for it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. How would you like to improve your health? Let's get healthy. Tips you can use today for free. They don't require any money at all. You can download a free ebook, 15 Tips to Improve Your Health, at lethealthy.com. That's lethealthy.com. Again, it's lethealthy.com. And let's get healthy for free. Turn conversation with Hank Idsinga. He's retired Toronto police homicide detective. He's authored the book, The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop. Look for it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Before we went to break, we're talking about getting involved in this missing persons investigation that involved a serial killer that's preying on gay men in Toronto. Can you continue on with where you left off?
Sure. We were talking about the disappearance of Andrew Kinsman in June of 2017, and we found some video surveillance of a red Dodge Caravan in Andrew Kinsman's neighborhood the day and the time that he went missing. So once we identified it as a Dodge Caravan, and we went to the Ministry of Transportation and said, give us a list of all the Dodge Caravans in the Toronto area, 2004 to 2006, Inferno Red. And they gave us a list of 6,181 Dodge Caravans.
That's a lot of them.
And that's a lot of them. But Kinsman had made a notation on his daily calendar for the day he went missing that he was going to meet somebody named Bruce at 3 p.m. So out of those thousands of Dodge Caravans, how many were registered to somebody named Bruce? There was actually 5 of them, and one of them being Bruce McArthur. And one of the investigators, having interviewed McArthur several years earlier for the other missing men, said, Bruce McArthur, we interviewed him in 2013. Okay, let's take a good look at Bruce McArthur. And we found out that he had previously been arrested for choking a male in the back of his van, but no charges were laid. And so we really started to focus on him, and we recovered that van because as soon as we made it known publicly that we were investigating this, he got rid of the van and we recovered it from a wrecking yard. And it wasn't until November of 2017 where we found some blood in the back of the van, and we could link that blood to Andrew Kinsman. So that's when it evolved from a missing persons investigation back into a homicide investigation. And we ended up sneaking into McArthur's apartment one night with a warrant and cloning his computer. And in January of 2018, we finally went through that analysis and recovered. He liked to dress his victims up and take photographs of them once they were deceased before he dismembered them and put them into planters at one of his landscaping clients' house. So he was arrested in January of 2018 and charged initially with 2 counts of murder, but we hadn't recovered any of the remains yet. So it was a bit of a risk, as everybody knows, with no-body homicide cases. But within a few days, we started recovering some of the remains from these planters. And the more remains we found and the more photographs we recovered from his computer, we identified our victims over a span of several months and ended up charging him with 8 counts of first-degree murder. And it wasn't until the summer of 2018 where we recovered our last victim from the ravine at the back of the house where he stored all of these remains. So he ended up pleading guilty in January of 2019 to 8 counts of first-degree murder, and he will languish in prison for the rest of his life. And the police team did a fantastic job. The day he was arrested in January of 2018, he was getting ready to kill his 9th victim. And by virtue of arresting him, we prevented that from happening and saved a life there. So
saving lives is really good.
And,
a lot of people,
results at the end.
A lot of people don't see the value, and they don't think that we're. I say we. I don't think it's a lot different between Canada and the United States, but they don't see that we are very driven by saving lives.
Driven by saving lives, and public safety is absolutely paramount. We'll even compromise investigations sometimes if we need to get word out to the public to warn them, this is what's going on. And yeah, I'm kind of risking my bad guy seeing this news release, and he's going to try and get rid of evidence. But we've got to let the public know. And the homicide work is always described as reactive, and I say no. It's very much proactive, right? Because by virtue of solving cases and getting these bad guys into custody, we're saving lives down the road. So, and we really see that with the advent of technology and the clearance rates and solve rates of homicides going up. And as those solve rates and clearance rates go up, more of the right people are getting put into prison for lengthy prison sentences, and you're seeing the homicide rates across the continent actually going down now. And I think that's a contributing factor, absolutely, to why the homicide rates overall are going down.
You guys did a great job on that case. And one thing that struck me in your conversation was, and I tell people this all the time, when it comes to killers in particular, especially those where the case is still open, meaning they're not going to court, they often have an idea who did it. And it's someone that before they can't get this pesky thing called evidence. That was the case because this guy was involved earlier in the investigation, wasn't he?
He was involved earlier, and like you said, you can't manufacture evidence. And, in 2022, we cleared over 85% of our homicides in the city of Toronto, but you still had that 15% that went unsolved. And in the majority of those, you know exactly who did it. You just don't have the evidence.
Right.
And that's why you keep pushing and trying to get that final piece of evidence that really puts it over the top to the point where you can lay that charge. And it can be very, very frustrating, but we don't like to cut corners. We don't like to cheat. We don't like to manufacture anything. If it's there, fantastic. Let's lay the charge. Let's get this before the courts. If it's not there, it'll get there one day. Right. Hopefully that tip comes in. Somebody picks up the phone and makes that call. That little piece of forensic evidence comes forward. We're seeing lots of cases being solved now, 40, 50 years after the fact, through the use of genetic genealogy. And so as technology evolves, a lot of these cases that were put on a shelf, hopefully they get solved down the road as well.
One of the things that really impressed me, and by the way, that is no easy task, closing 85% of all cases. But it's the 15% that are open, the ones that haunt me in particular, even to this day. Would that be fair for you?
Yeah, absolutely. People ask me all the time, do you really dwell on these cases? And I always say just the unsolved ones. Right. And, as I spent my career in homicide, for instance, I remember I had a case in 2005 that we weren't able to solve. I know who did it, but not able to lay that charge. And if in 2019, even as I had made my way to unit commander of the homicide squad, a tip came in or a witness came forward for that 2005 case, I would jump all over that. And even now today, being retired for a couple of years, if the cold case squad called me and said, hey, we got a tip on this case of yours from 2005, I would put the phone down. I said, I'd say, I'll be there in an hour. I'm all over that. So I'll give you guys and help you guys out with anything that you need. So I think that's really a good indicator of a fabulous homicide investigator who is never willing to let go and is just determined and dogged in their pursuit of being able to close that case and lay that charge. And that's exactly the type of person I always wanted to recruit into the squad when I was in charge of it.
Not everybody's cut out for this. Not everybody makes a good homicide detective. And by the way, and this is more a statement than a question, most people think I'm a homicide detective. I arrested a lot of people for murder, a lot of homicide arrests. I investigated quite a few as a police officer and as patrolman as well. I was not a detective. I didn't do the intricacy stuff. However, the chances of getting murdered by someone you don't know, you're not connected to, that is not known to you, are very slim.
It is, that's absolutely true. And, those stranger on stranger homicides are the toughest ones to solve as well. So that's where the video surveillance really comes in handy, as well as the cell phone technology to gather that type of evidence and open up those types of clues. But you're right, the vast majority of people who are killed by somebody that they know, that there's been a previous connection with. I talk about another case in the book.
Well, before we go to another case, let's talk about that when we return. We're talking with Hank Idsinga, a retired Toronto police homicide detective. He's authored the book, The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop. Look for it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Look for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on youtube.com. And be sure to subscribe. Like everything we do, it is free. Look for and subscribe to Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on YouTube for great police videos and episodes of the podcast.
The Sherwin-Williams Summer Sale is here. Get 30% off select paints and stains or 35% off our newest product, Emerald Symmetry, July 17th through the 27th. Whether you're refreshing your interior or exterior, we've got the colors to bring your vision to life. And with delivery, getting everything to your door is easier than ever. Shop online to have it delivered or visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details. Delivery available on qualifying orders.
You can't predict the future, but you can prepare for it. Arizona State University is building degrees for what's ahead. Programs designed around emerging fields, taught by faculty whose research is shaping our future, not just teaching about it. It's why we've been ranked #1 in innovation for more than a decade. Your future is worth preparing for, and you don't have to prepare alone. Future-proof your career. Explore more than 350 programs at asuonline.asu.edu. That's a degree better.
Return a conversation with Hank Idsinga. He is retired Toronto police homicide detective. He's author of the book, The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop. And you look for it at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. That's The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop. We talked earlier about the investigation. It was a Netflix documentary television show that you and your agency did. You were a major case manager involving a serial killer that preyed on gay men. Phenomenal job, by the way, that you all did on that one.
Thank you.
And we also talked about closing 85% of the cases, at 15% are still open. And you have an idea who did that, but you can't prove it in court. And those always found to be particularly haunting. You started talking about another case. Can you elaborate on that one?
Yeah, we were talking about stranger-on-stranger homicides being very difficult, and there's another case in the book, and I refer to it as my first serial killer case, although it's not your prototypical serial killer that's usually motivated by sex. This was a case of a fellow named Mark Moore who shot and killed 4 people over a 76-day period back in 2010. And the first 3 of his victims were complete strangers to him. He was just such a dangerous animal out on the streets that he shot and killed 3 random people back in September of 2010. And his 4th victim, a fellow named Carl Cole, he shot and killed him in November of 2010, still out on the street, but there was a previous relationship between the 2 of them. But those are incredibly difficult to solve, and we were lucky to tie it together with ballistics and a wiretap and put all the clues together. But it had it been just those first 3 victims, just stranger on stranger, I don't know if we would have gotten there. So we were able to identify him once he killed that 4th victim, and we could establish that relationship. So those cases are definitely very, very difficult.
One of the things I noticed about the documentary in this case is you guys tend to, and I say guys, that means men and women, in Toronto tend to use more of the tech stuff than what I was used to. And granted, I policed a long time ago.
You know, it's just constantly evolved. And I still remember the first murder case I did in 2005 and getting grilled in the witness stand. And if you're going to be a homicide detective, you better get used to being grilled in the witness box for days and days on end. But just getting grilled about text messages that the victim and the suspect may have been sending to each other. And it was still brand new that cellular companies were retaining these text messages on their servers. So that became absolutely huge as of 2005 and was used in all of the investigations that I undertook in the ensuing years. And then really around 2000, 2001, we started seeing so much surveillance video popping up. You know, in 2005, when I started, I still remember one of the other teams caught a murder on video. We all came into the office to watch it. It was fascinating. Wow, you've got this murder on video. And by the time I left in 2023, if you didn't have video of a murder, it was unusual. So I don't know if it's quite like that south of the border, but in Toronto, Toronto, there are cameras absolutely everywhere, usually privately owned, and that becomes a big part of the labor process as well, is recovering that video footage and retaining it and going through it to the point where we've actually established a video analysis unit back in 2018 just to help us sort through these thousands and thousands of hours of video surveillance. You know, going back to Andrew Kinsman's disappearance, he disappeared June of 2017. It wasn't until late August where we found that red van on video, just by manually poring over all these hours and hours of video surveillance. That's become a huge leap in technology and a huge advantage for investigators.
Yeah, we certainly didn't have all that back in the 80s and 90s when I was policing, and yet we still solve these crimes. And people watch these shows nowadays, and the first thing that a homicide detective looks for is video. And I'm like, I wish we had that. We didn't have that back in the day. Yeah,
it makes a huge difference. And you know, compared to those days in the 80s and 90s and even before cellular telephones, it was very, very difficult. Now, you didn't have the street-level violence, at least up here, that we're seeing now, where you have those random stranger-on-stranger murders. Back then, it certainly happened, but I don't think to the frequency that we see now, where about half of the murders that we're seeing up here are firearms-related, on-the-street type of murders. So, you know, you didn't need the cell phones and the surveillance video when you're investigating a domestic murder, obviously. But those street-level murders, very, very difficult to solve back in the day without those technological advantages that we have today.
We had one where I was a sergeant, and a woman who turned out to be a sex worker, and I'm using that term because that's a trendy term used nowadays, was stabbed multiple times and thrown down a flight of stairs in a terraced garden-style apartment. And the officer on the scene called me to it like it was normal, and he said, by the way, I happen to have a criminal summons for this apartment, but this guy won't answer. So I knocked on the door. The guy opened the door. I put my foot in the doorway and looked, and I noticed a blood spot on his cheek. And then I noticed he had a lot of blood on his shoes. Turns out he was the murderer. And that's how we solved those cases. There was nothing complicated about it. It was like you had to be observant. We didn't have like videos of and cell phones and all that stuff that they rely on nowadays.
Yeah, you know what? That's how you did it back then, and it's still such a big part of a good homicide investigation, because still knocking on that right door at the right time might yield you that clue, right? We had a very infamous case here in Toronto around 2000 of a young girl who was snatched off the streets, and she was sexually assaulted and killed, and her body was recovered, and they found some carpet fibers on her body and knew she'd been on a green carpet. And it was just good work by some canvassing officers. They knocked on one fellow's door, they noticed he had a green carpet, and they made note of it, and they were able to link that together. But there was certainly no surveillance video evidence that was going to help. There was no cellular telephone evidence that was going to help. So those little clues, as relevant as they are still today, and that door knocking police work that is still relevant today was even more so back then.
Which we all hated doing, but a lot of cases are solved by that. The neighborhood canvas. Hank, you wrote this book, The High Road Confessions of a Homicide Cop. What possessed you to write this book?
You know, I had no intention of writing a book. I think it's not unusual for any police officer who's worked in a big city like Baltimore or Toronto to not have at one point in time turn to one of their coworkers and shake their head and say, good Lord, I should write a book. Yeah. Because the unbelievable things that we see. And it wasn't until after I retired, and obviously I was involved in some pretty high-profile cases, that a publisher contacted me, and they said, you know, what do you think about writing your memoirs? And I thought about it for a little while, and I thought, okay, you know what? That would be a really good way to leave a bit of a legacy piece behind for my descendants and my daughter and my family. I'll do it. So I spent the vast majority of 2024 writing that book and handed in the manuscript at the end of 2024. And then 2025 was spent going back and forth between editors and legal reviews and copy editors until it was ready to go really in late 2025, early 2026. And it was released April 28th of 2026. Became an instant #1 bestseller up here in Canada, and it stayed at the #1 spot for several weeks. It got knocked down to #2 for a couple of weeks, and then this week it's right back up to #1 again. So
kudos to you.
Very, very proud of that, and very, very pleased with the results. And now they're pestering me to write a second book, so I'll see whether
we'll think about that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. The book is called The High Road,
Exactly.
Confessions of a Homicide Cop. Hank Idsinga, thanks so much for your service, and thanks for talking about it on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Both very much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Sean. It was great being on here and chatting with you. It's always great to talk to other police officers on these podcasts and radio shows because I think we get each other. So really, really great to talk to you.
A huge thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast version of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, by the way, which is a nationally syndicated radio show. And we broadcast on over 115 radio stations across the United States to more than 44 million combined population. If you like our show, there's two simple things you can do. Go to our website, letradio.com. Add your favorites. Check it often. You can find episodes of the show right there. And the second one involves our Facebook page. It's so easy to find great content, including past episodes of the show. And when you see something that you like, that resonates with you, be sure to share it with your friends. We'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Whiteley. See ya.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.